Hey there, and welcome to this Flern Pro tutorial on DJ Dolo, also known as Glenn. We're going to be making this image together. We've gone over the Lightroom in section 1. If you guys missed that, be sure to check out section 1, which covers the Lightroom, basically the photo shoot, and what got us to where we are here. And today we're going to be compositing it together. So we're going to be doing the Photoshop in two different parts. Part 1 is going to be basically compositing, working with our exposure, getting the sky in there and things like that. And then part 2 is going to be color work and other adjustments as well. So let's go ahead and start off. So to get to where I am right now, basically I just took one step, and that's just going to save a little bit of time. Went to File, down here to Scripts, and down here to Load Files into Stack. Now you can just browse over to your tutorial images, shift click all of them, and hit Open. And then you're just going to hit this OK key, and they'll all come together just like this for you. Okay, I'm going to hit F to full screen. And now we're going to talk about basically all the files that we've got together. So let's make these top ones invisible. I can see these two are for clouds, giving you a couple options here based on what you want to use. I'm going to command click the two of those and then hit command G, group them together, and we're going to just double click and call that clouds. And shift command close bracket will move that all the way to the top. Okay. Now we've got a couple of these images that are, here above for the Logan sign. We've got our properly exposed image. Remember, we've got an overexposed image for the shadow and an underexposed for the highlight. So we're going to start off with our base image here on the very bottom. Now, this is kind of important. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be using an auto align tool in Photoshop, and that's going to help to place these into our scene. What we do want to make sure that we do, however, is we want to make sure that the image that you want to keep where it is on the bottom, and the image that you want to move into place is on the top. I'll show you guys basically how that works. So these should all be in the exact same place. Just in case they're not, I'm going to shift click the three of those and go to Edit down to Auto Align Layers and hit OK. This should do basically nothing because they're the exact same image and they should of course be in the same place. Now what we're going to do is make sure that these up here also fit in with our images down here. So this and this should be about the same exposure, just kind of like looking up. So what we're going to do is I'm going to shift click this layer, and we're going to command click all these now and go to Edit and Auto Align Layers and hit OK. There we go, and it's going to return our result. Now, ideally, we can see what's going on here. This is what you do not want to happen. You can see they are, it's actually pretty funny with his head tilted like that. They are auto-aligned, but what it is it kept this file from doing anything. This file is now, not changed, and this file down here is changed. So that's not what we want. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to bring this layer right up there. So this layer is the bottom one, okay? And then we're going to go ahead and lock that like it's a background. Next, I'm going to shift click the three of those, and we're going to go to Edit and to Auto Align Layers. And this time it should, cross your fingers, do what we want it to. It's going to warp these into place. So you can see this layer is a lot less important than this layer, which contains all this information. If it warps your street sign and things like that, that's not really that big of a deal. And you can see that does look very good. So having this lock on there is going to make sure that that does not get moved, and also having it directly under the layer that you don't mind getting moved a little bit, that's what's going to get you in place. So this had to get warped just a little bit. If you don't want something warped, like basically what you would do instead of angling your camera up, there's some ball heads that you can use that will change on the parallax, which was it's just a fancy way of saying like you can use special ball heads to where you can do these. Basically, we're creating a panorama here. We're just going up instead of left and right. There's some that you can do it that will keep in, it'll keep in mind that you're moving these, so they rotate about the image sensor rather than about the actual lens. And I didn't do it very accurately at all. I literally just pushed my camera straight up and then took a picture. So that's why we're getting that warping. But if you didn't want any warping, there's special parallax ball heads that you can get that will do that. Okay. All right. All's looking good. We're going to click on this layer. I'm going to unlock it, and then I'm going to bring it back down here. So we've got basically what we want now. And I've got a couple different options for for this area on the top. Basically, they're just slightly different exposures, and I think we'll wind up going with this one. It's got some cool flare there from the headlights too. You probably don't have to include, you wouldn't have to include both of these. I just giving you guys a couple different options. You can see they're framed slightly different. All right, so we're actually just going to delete that one, and now we have there we go. We have a few different exposures that we're working with. So we have our base exposure again, the underexposed version, the overexposed version, and what's going on here above everything. Okay, now I don't really need any of this information that's up here on the top and over there on the left. So I'm gonna hit the C for the crop tool, and I'm gonna bring this in from the left, there we go, to the right, and do the same over here. Conveniently, this crops out our softbox too. You can see that, like, oh, that's nice. Now we don't have to clone stamp that out or anything like that. And we're gonna go ahead and bring this in there as well, and kind of figure out, that's going to be about our crop. It doesn't have to be perfect at this point. We can always change that later if we decide to. Just make sure you have this unchecked, delete crop pixels. We do not want to delete the pixels that are outside, just in case you wanted a little bit of your sky back, or you decided you're going to change your crop in just a little bit. So just make sure that that is not checked. Okay, we're going to hit this checkbox up there, and that's going to go ahead and crop into our scene. So pretty cool. You'll notice as well, let's just go to image and then down to image size. We have, excuse me, this was photographed on a Canon 5D Mark II, which is about 21 megapixels. Now we have significantly more than 21 megapixels. So you can see, and it's a bit closer to a square crop as well. So that's a good way to get as many megapixels as you want. All right, so we can see that we did, bring in the change and the sky, and really that wasn't too hard, right? Just had to make sure we locked the one frame that we wanted to keep in place and keep it directly under the frames that we did want to move. We're just going to click on this layer here, and I'm going to put a layer mask on it. So we're going to click here on our layer mask button, and I'm going to paint with our brush tool. Now you can go ahead and load in the brush that's included in this tutorial, and basically I'm just going to paint at 50%, there we go, flow here along the bottom, and they should align pretty well, but I just want to make sure that areas like this are not included. I want everything below the sky to be from the original file. If you want to look at your layer mask, just hit the / key above your return key, and that'll kind of show you the quick mask, or you can hold Alt or Option and click on your layer mask, and here we can see, just to clean it up a little bit, and there we are. Just going to paint black over there just to be sure that this does not show up there. All right, and Alt or Option, we'll click right back on there, and there we can see. So everything's in the background, and you shouldn't really notice a difference between those. The only thing that we are going to see a slight difference is here's the sky where our subject is here is just a little bit darker than the sky here. So we can see it's a little bit darker there, and instead of me trying to go and do that with a layer mask, it's going to get kind of messy to do that. What we're going to do instead is I'm going to use a there we go, let's just make sure that blends in well. I'm going to use a clipping mask to just make this area a little bit darker on our sky layer. So in case you guys are unfamiliar with clipping masks, you can go to Learn, type in clipping mask, and learn all about how to create clipping masks and things like that. Or I will just show you here, very quick example. I'm on one layer, and I'm just going to create something that looks like that, not very fancy. And on a new layer above it, I'm going to choose a different color here, and we're going to paint right above there. Now, let's say I want this layer 3 to only be visible where layer 2 is visible. That's the perfect time when we want to use clipping masks. So to get there, I'm going to right click, go to create clipping mask. Now layer 3, let's just use our move tool, is only visible where layer 2 is visible. I can move layer 2 around, and layer 3 is only going to be there. Now it comes in really handy when you want to use things like adjustment layers. So I'm going to grab adjustment layer, let's go to just curves here, click here in the middle and drag down, there we go. And I'm going to hit Option Command G, which is the same, that's the keyboard shortcut for creating clipping mask. And you can see now our adjustment layer is only visible again where layer 2 is visible. All right, and these things can still be moved around. Very, very cool. So let's just delete all those, and we're going to basically use the same principle here. What I want to do is I'm going to make an adjustment layer. We're going to go to curves, and I'm going to click here and drag down just a little bit. Okay. Now, the problem here is that this is affecting everything, right? It's affecting this layer, but it's also affecting this layer. So we're going to use our clipping mask, Option Command G, and all of a sudden, this is only affecting the sky layer. And we can see, because I made it a little bit darker, it now blends in perfectly. So if it needs to get a little bit darker, which I think it might right around there, we just click right here, and you can use your up or down arrows here. Like if I brought this up, we could see now it's too bright. We're making the problem worse. So we're going to bring that down until the problem is fixed. And right about there, we can see our problem is fixed. So let's just make this visible and invisible. And we can see, yep, that's about the exposure that we want. So really cool way to just kind of like fix the exposure and you know, take care of some of those issues right off the bat. Clipping masks are really great. I like them a lot. Okay, I'm going to shift click the two of those, and we'll just double click this, and we'll just call this sky. Okay, now our sky we're going to bring right down here as well. So then we've got some things to take care of when it comes to our little, like the lighter areas in our photos. You know, this area here. Oops, we don't want to move that, by the way. So if you want to lock that, you can do that so that you won't be able to move it using locks a couple times in this tutorial. Now I want this layer to only be visible here, you know, where the underlying layer is overexposed. You can do this in a few different ways. You could just grab a layer mask and a brush tool and paint it in, and probably wouldn't be able to tell. You could use blend if, or you could use apply image. I'm going to show you, we're going to start off with apply image and see if that makes it work. If not, we'll just try something else. So apply image is always done on layer masks. Well, to be effective, it is anyway. You can use it however you'd like, but for it to be effective, I recommend creating a layer mask. So let's put a layer mask on this layer, and I'm going to go to image and down to apply image. And what this basically does is it takes a snapshot of everything you can see in your image, and it applies it to the layer mask. So merged, RGB, multiply, this is pretty much the settings that you want all the time. So we're going to hit OK there, and now we're going to see what this does. So let's turn this off and on, invisible and visible again. Now let's look at our layer mask. Hold Alt or Option and click on your layer mask. So this is basically, it took a snapshot of my image and then applied it right to the layer mask. So my layer mask now is saying this layer should not be visible. Again, this is the layer mask. It doesn't look like a layer mask because it looks like my image, but it is the layer mask. It's basically saying this layer should only be visible where the underlying layers are lighter. And in some cases, this works a lot better than blend if. So that's why we're going to be using it here. So it's visible here in the headlights, here in these marquee signs, and even up there, a little bit on our subject as well. So we can see that's basically getting our exposure back. Now, we can still control this, it's just a layer mask. So like I don't want it visible here on the sign, so I'm gonna make it not visible there on the sign. I'm just gonna use black on my layer mask, and I'm gonna paint black, especially over there on the sky and things like that. So now we can just turn this layer off and on to see where it is visible. Like look at all that nice detail we're able to get back in that sign back there. Pretty cool. Now here, I wanna make sure it's visible completely. So we're just gonna paint with white on our, white with our paintbrush here, just to make this visible. There we go, the nice soft edge brush. Just making sure we get back that detail. What this is gonna basically wind up doing is making it look like you are better at taking pictures because you can nail an exposure a little bit better. Pretty cool. So I highly recommend doing that. You know, basically in a photo, for the most part, unless you're trying to do something relatively artistic, you don't really want things to be overexposed or underexposed. You know, like these are slightly overexposed. They don't look that bad, but you know, now they're more properly exposed. You can still do things like, I'm going to lower the opacity a little bit because I do like the fact that they are bright. I want them to be bright, but I would like to see a little bit of detail in there. And we can play around with that in a little bit, which mostly what we're going to be doing with that is in part 2. They'll get a little bit brighter, but having that detail in there, just in case you want it, is really, really nice. All right. Now, can we do the same thing with the shadows? We sure can. So I'm going to click on this layer. We're going to put a layer mask on there as well. And I'm going to go to image and down here to apply image. All right. Now you're seeing something interesting happen. It's making these, let's just hit OK. And we'll click on this. So these are the shadows. These shadow, it's brightening things up, which is supposed to be visible in the shadows, but it's more visible here in the highlights than in the shadows, because that's my layer mask. Dark on the layer mask makes the layer invisible. Light makes a layer mask visible. So you can see this layer is visible here more in my highlights than in my shadows, which is doing the exact opposite of what we want. It's brightening our highlights up and it's not touching our shadows, which is like, well, it's not what we wanted. So let's hit undo there, and I'm going to do image and then apply image. Now what we're going to do instead is I'm going to click this invert button. So what it's going to do now is this layer is not going to be visible where my highlights are. It's just going to be visible where my shadows are. So let's hit OK. Effectively, it's going to make our shadows quite a bit brighter without affecting our highlights. So you can see our highlights there are intact. So it's going to give us a lot more of a flat image, but we do have a lot more control. And we can see all that nice detail in there as well. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to group this with itself. Okay, and then we're going to put a layer mask on the group, and then I can choose where I want this layer to be visible and where I want this layer to not be visible. I just painted on this layer mask earlier, if you guys remember that. But if you don't want to destroy this layer mask, like if I want to keep that 100% intact, that looks pretty cool actually. Maybe I'll just leave it like this, and we're done. If I want to keep this layer mask intact, what I want to do is group it with itself, and then I want to put a layer mask on the group. So that way I can paint black on a layer mask that's on the group, just like this, if I want this area to be darker, which in fact I do. But if I still wanted to paint it lighter, I could do that and paint white on here, and that would keep my detail intact. That's a lot different than if I just painted black on this. There we go. Like I painted black on that, right, to make it not visible, but then I wanted it back, I paint white. Well, now it's visible everywhere, including the headlights. So that's the main lesson, is I can keep the information of where it is and is not going to be visible, but also do like a high level at the same time, which is pretty cool. All right, let's take away the visibility from there. This, mostly I wanted it to be visible like here on the front part of the car and things like that. We'll take it away there as well. A little bit where our subject is. And we can kind of lower our opacity as well. So let's just make that visible and then not visible, so we can see the difference that it's making there. All right. Go with our brush tool and paint black as well. So we're just kind of like, this is almost like a high level dodge and burn, but we're using the original picture information, which is, it's always going to be a lot better. You're going to get a lot higher quality out of it. All right. Pretty cool. There we go. And that's a pretty good start. Let's just paint that black right over there. Yeah, that's a pretty good start to the image itself. So let's make that invisible. So already we've basically gone from this, we've added our sky in there, we've changed the exposure there in my highlights and in my shadows. So I'm going to hold Alt or Option and click on this eyeball, and so we've gone from this to that, and that really didn't take too long. We can see our exposure looks quite a bit more even with the shadows and the highlights and everything. Plus we've gained a lot of information there in the sky. Now what I would recommend doing is, especially when you do add a sky like this, just kind of zoom in to make sure everything like blends together quite well. Just turn this off and on to see where it's visible. Like here we have a transition area, and yeah, it looks good. Now it's particularly helpful because this area is out of focus. So it's like, if there was a slight transition like there is there, like it's out of focus. It's so blurred that, really can't, I can't tell if it is a little bit off. If it was, you could always shift some things around or clone stamp and use your move tool and things like that. But if it's out of focus like that, especially in the background, you're going to be just fine. Okay, well, this is looking really good. Now, in the final image, what I wound up doing is getting rid of the street lamp. So we'll just talk about that in just a little bit. Let's group those, and we'll call those exposure. There we go. And we're going to create a new layer above that. So those are all things that, like they didn't require a whole lot of thought, but they're, relatively important for this end image. Let's talk about the things that we want to do, creating a plan for this image. And this is something that pretty much I always try to create, at least a rough plan when I'm creating an image, and it just helps you to understand what's going on. So we'll just group this together with itself, this layer, and call this plan. Okay. With this layer, basically I just like go around and circle things and figure out what I like and what I don't like and what's distracting and things like that. And then I take care of those things. Okay, so obviously we want our focal point to be, right here, right? That's what we want our focal point to be. We've got a nice triangle here with, you look at your subject, come up to the sign, look down to the headlights, and hopefully come over back and look at our subject again. So like 1 point, 2 point, 3 point, we've got a nice little triangle going on there. Gives your eyes something to look at, which is nice. Okay, now anything that distracts from that, like this street light over there, you could do that, or you could do this. To me, it's like it's pulling our eye just a little bit too far off there. So what we're going to do is I'm actually going to wind up taking away that street light. And when you're doing your plan, if you want to do something like really rough, here's what I would recommend. Like, don't do things perfect if you're not even sure you're going to do them. So we're in our plans like, maybe we'll get rid of the street light. Just grab a brush tool, okay, and then grab this color like right there, and then just paint over it. Like, do it so super rough, but just enough to be like, does that look better or not? And we'll just make this visible and then invisible. So it's you don't have to do a good job with some of these things to like make those decisions. And we can see that it's a nice detail, but without it you definitely focus more over here. So that's why we're going to get rid of that. All right, so let's go back to our plan now and discuss what we're going to be doing. All right, so we're going to get rid of that. Other things that are slightly distracting, like little lights like that, whatever's going on over there, we're going to clean up some of this that's on the ground. We're not trying to create like a picture perfect like Target ad where everything's like pure white and red, right? Like this is it doesn't have to be perfect. Like he's supposed to obviously be on the street. So we're gonna have some things like that, like this little oil spill. Like I'm totally fine with that. In general, like I don't really want this license plate to be in there, so we're gonna take that out as well. We're gonna like go through, and it depends on what level of refinement you'd like to do. Little things like this, normally I would go through and spend like an hour or two taking care of like little details like that. That are just gonna like distract your eye just a little bit, like just like tiny little elements that things like that, like little reflections there. Generally I would go through and take care of those. This is a tutorial, so we're not going to spend an hour and a half doing all of those, but if you can clean up like tiny little reflections and things like that, just even these like little bolts, the image itself is going to be a little bit more clean. But you want to just kind of like scroll around and see whatever grabs your eye, like that little gum wrapper or whatever that's near his foot, the cigarette and whatnot. Those things are just like grabbing my eye, and so I want to make sure I take care of those. I'm just kind of scrolling around, like this little thing that hangs down from the car, that's grabbing my eye. This curb here is just way too bright, so we're gonna have to make that dark. It's supposed to be a down arrow. I use up arrows and down arrows to make things brighter. The wheel's gonna have to be a lot brighter because it's should be a focal point of the image. We're probably gonna get rid of this. I haven't decided yet, but again, we could just use the same strategy for that as well. Sky looks pretty good. That light up there, that little thing right there, we're gonna get rid of. That little thing we're gonna get rid of as well. And we might get rid of that. So all these little things that we want to do to the image, kind of like little fixes. This little guy we're gonna get rid of. I don't need that big logo in this image. We're gonna get rid of this wheel back there. I did contemplate getting rid of this car back here, but we don't really have any information in which to get rid of it. So it's gonna be pretty hard to actually get rid of this, but we can darken it down, and that's gonna help. That's gonna help draw a little bit less attention to that area. Let's create a new light or a new layer, and then we'll talk about like overall changes and things like that. So these are actually like specific details, but now let's talk about like this area has to come up in brightness. we need to do some work on the colors here. I want to like build in some light beams here, you know, from the actual car. We're going to be doing that. It's supposed to be a cloud. Beautiful, huh? Cloud, we're going to bring that up. This area here, we're going to make that quite a bit more red as well. And we're going to desaturate it, the whole image. And there we go. And then this is going to be sharpened. Okay, so you don't have to do all this stuff that I'm doing. You know, partially the reason I'm doing it is so we can have a plan and you can see like, oh, okay, we actually did all that stuff. So partially it's for the tutorial. The other part is, you know, when you're just like at this stage, you can kind of see things as a whole and you can like find all the little things that bug you. As soon as you start like digging in and actually like doing all the tiny little details, you might miss things. Like you might take care of tiny little details and retouch the skin all beautiful, blah, blah, blah. And then like, you know, forget the fact that there's a wheel right here that you don't want in, or like, hey, maybe I don't want that street light in. So that's just a good way to do it. Or like, hey, maybe I want to put a sky in there. So that's why I create these plans, because when looking things at like an overall like this, you tend to see things, and when you're in it, sometimes you can't see it. It's like a bad relationship. You don't realize how bad it was until you get out. It's the same thing. We're looking at it from the outside in before we work on it, so you can see what you need to do when you're in it. All right, maybe not like a bad relationship. Not like I've ever had one. I've just heard people say that. All my relationships are spectacular because I'm perfect. No, not really. Okay, we're going to go ahead and stick a sky in there now, and kind of come up with our plan for that. So I got you a couple different skies to work with here. We're going to start off with this one, and I'm going to show you guys, even when you do have a sky that's totally different color, you can oftentimes use those as well. So the sky, we're basically going to start off the simplest technique we're going to start with, and then we're going to move up from there. Before we do this sky, we have decided we're going to get rid of the street light, right? So what we're going to do is I'm going to create a new layer below those, okay? And I'd just like to get rid of this guy. We're going to use our clone stamp tool. So S for the clone stamp tool, and I'm going to hold Alt or Option and sample right over here. And I'm going to hold Option as well as Shift, and it's going to give me a little preview of what we're going to do. Make sure you're sampled on current and below here. Okay, so Alt or Option to sample, and then Shift as well as Alt or Option, and it's going to give you a little preview of what you're actually going to be doing. So it's easier to line things up. Like here you can see, okay, that doesn't look right. Let's start right about there. There we go, and I'm going to paint that in, and there we go. I know that I've, you know, done a good job painting that in. Now this area here, if you wanted to use probably like a patch tool, or let's try even like a healing brush tool, you'd probably take care of this whole area with a healing brush tool. Generally larger areas like that, I prefer to use something like a healing brush tool instead of a clone stamp tool. Although we did get a bright area like that. So let's try the clone stamp tool instead. Let's sample over there and paint a little bit from the left to the right. Sample over here, paint from the right to the left. All right. The problem being that, you know, sometimes you get this, like, it's just not, you know, that's not a very, like, smooth gradient. So I would recommend lowering your flow on your clone stamp tool to like 10% and just paint with like a large soft brush. There we go. To try to get something that like blends in really evenly. So I'm not putting a lot down right now. I'm painting at 10% flow, and we're just kind of painting that in. So that's basically all with a clone stamp brush there, at different sizes. All right, let's create a new layer. And this little pole right here, you can kind of figure out like where you want it to stop. Like I'm okay with it stopping right there. Like that doesn't really look weird to me anyway. It's like a pole, yeah, it goes up to there. But maybe let's cut it off down there. So let's use our clone stamp tool. Again, same method. So Alt or Option to sample a point, and then hold down the Shift key as well. And there we go. We're going to paint that in. And go all the way up to there. There we go, looking pretty good. For the left side of this window, and especially right there, you know, we can just sample. You can do this in a number of ways. You can try to find another window to sample. In this case, I'm not sure we are going to find one. So good luck there. Or you can just try to like build it in from from the other way around. So we'll try that. There we go. And I haven't decided where I want this to stop, but there we go. We'll just have it like blend in right there. Looks totally fine. And this area there, it depends on like how, I don't know, strict you are with how, I mean, no one would notice that, trust me. But if we want to take care of it, I will come in here from the left to the right and kind of just like bring this down like that and make it a little bit more subtle at least. All right. I didn't line those up very well, so I'm just going to use my eraser tool and I'm going to erase that away. Especially right there, and then we're just going to try that again. All right, cool. There we go. And that pool's pretty much gone out of there. Great. So now we're ready to stick a sky into our image, and you can do this in a few different ways. I'm going to start off with what's basically the easiest way, and then if that doesn't work, you move to the harder way. And then if that doesn't work, you move to the harder way again. Oh, we did think about removing this, so let's do that again. I keep making a point and then realizing we have to do something, you know, never mind, we have to do this thing. Let's just like, I'm going to grab my brush tool and just paint with it very quickly down here and just see like, does it look better with that gone or not? So we'll just click on this layer, visible and invisible. And I think it does look a little bit better with it gone. So what we're going to do is kind of zoom in here and then we'll just do a slightly better job. So we'll create a new layer. The reason I do it like the quick way is you might decide that you want it there, and then you don't want to waste 5 or 10 minutes of work. Even you don't want to waste 1 minute of work if you don't have to. If you can use a healing, or you can use a brush tool and just like rough it in 20 seconds. Don't waste 10 more seconds if you don't have to, right? There we go. And I'm just grabbing the brush tool now, and I'm holding Alt or Option to sample some colors that are there in the sky, and I'm just painting them in. There we go. Paint back our roof. It's amazing what you can do with the brush tool, especially when something's out of focus like that. It's like, okay, yeah, looks pretty good. All right. Cool. So we've taken care of that area as well. And it's, it's not perfect, but we're going to put a sky over top of that, so it'll wind up being looking a lot better. Okay, great. So we've taken care of, a couple of those like areas just, to help draw more attention to our subject, and we're ready to do our sky. So again, what I was saying earlier before I had to do those is that we want to start off with the easiest method first and then move to the harder method. So the easiest method would be able to select out this blue sky very easily and then use that as a layer mask for this other sky. So let's see if we can do it. Let's make a new layer. I'm going to go to select, and we're going to go down to color range because it's basically the same color, right? It's like, yep, that's blue and that's blue. So we'll go to select color range, and I should be able to click right there on the blue sky and have a pretty nice selection. Now, if you change colors a little bit, not a big deal. Just hit this plus eyedropper here, and that's going to allow you to add more color to your selection. There we go. And you can change what's called fuzziness, which is going to select either more or less. Okay, there we go. And I can, something right about there. Now, I'm not so concerned here with the sky. Keep in mind, this is going to be used to create a layer mask. I can always paint black on my layer mask right down here. What I'm mostly concerned with is like the clean line there, this line here in the trees, this thing, the sign, you know what I mean? Like that's, I don't want to go in there and paint that with a brush tool, but this I could just paint black like really easily. So we'll start off with that. Looks pretty good, and we'll hit OK. So there we have a nice selection. Let's click on this layer mask, and on this layer here, and I'm just going to click on my layer mask button. Cool. So now we can move things around. But if I use my move tool right now and try to move things around, we're moving the layer and the layer mask. We don't want to do that. So right over here, what I'm going to do is click on this chain link, and it's going to unlink my layer with my layer mask. Now I can move my layer independently, and my layer mask is going to stay in the exact same place, which is very cool. If I want to duplicate this layer mask to this other layer, just hold Alt or Option and click and drag from one layer to another one. And now we have that same layer mask is on this layer. pretty cool. So let's go ahead and see what we want to do. I like those clouds in there. So I'm going to hit Command T and kind of grab this and kind of move that around there and see if, you know, maybe I want to bring those clouds in. I'm not so worried about a color. We can change that pretty easily. I'm just worried about, you know, not worried. I'm just looking at things like texture and whatnot at this point. All right, so we have an interesting cloud pattern coming in from there. You know, if we want to bring this in, let's try Command T on this. Right click and go to flip horizontal. This was taken during a storm on Lake Michigan here in Chicago, which is pretty amazing. If you guys saw on the Flern Pro tutorials, such as one with the mermaid, this was taken in the same morning with all the flooding and everything like that. So this is another good lesson. Basically, when the sky looks cool, go out and take pictures of it, and then you can use it in any one of your photos. It's like, oh, sweet. All right, that's pretty nice there. Just want to make sure we bring that far enough down. You don't want the sea to be in this image. I think this is a little bit nicer. It's a little bit more of a peaceful sky. You know, this is like a little bit more like, this is like nice and fluffy and peaceful. So we're going to use that one. And we'll hit delete. But there are some things that I want to do to this photo just to make sure that it does, in fact, blend in quite a bit better. And we can always refine our layer mask. Like if your layer mask doesn't look that great to start off with, you can refine it. You can do all kinds of things like that. So we're going to do that in just a second. But first, I want to make sure that we're blending in. So there are a couple things that, you know, don't exactly work with this sky and the sky below it, and I want to change those things. I'm going to do something for an example, and it's going to help you to see things, and then we'll kind of get there. Okay, so with this layer, I'm just going to group this layer with itself, put a layer mask on it, and then I'm going to just real quick invert it there so we can see. I haven't messed with this layer mask. We've done this same technique earlier when it came to the apply image. I can see this guy that we just dropped in, okay, and I can see my original. Now our goal here is to get this guy looking more like our original, because, you know, this is the sky, this color, the lightness, everything like that. That's a pretty important part of the image, because that's, you know, that's how it really was. It doesn't have any clouds, so we can stick clouds in there, no problem, but I do want it to be closer to this color. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to grab our hue saturation adjustment layer, and I'm going to hit Option Command G, because that's going to clip this to only affect this layer, right? Now let's try like bringing up our saturation and bringing down our lightness just a bit. There we go. And we can see that we're starting to get a sky that looks a lot more like the original sky, and it's just going to blend in better. Everything's going to be a little bit happier, and things are going to look a little bit more real. So that looks pretty good. Let's just shift click there and see what that looks like. So there's a before. Doesn't really look like it's in that scene, you know, looks too light and desaturated. And there's the after, and we can see there. You could probably bump up the saturation even more, just a little bit. There we are. Now we can change the saturation of the whole image later, but at this point we just want to make sure that this sky does in fact look like it's in the scene. Let's bring our saturation down just a little bit. Okay. Very nice. So that's a, you know, relatively important thing, is to make sure if you do drop a sky in, make sure it matches with the sky that was there. At least, you know, roughly if you can. Okay, now I don't need this layer mask to be there, so I'm going to just hold Alt or Option and hit Delete, which will fill that layer mask completely with white, because white is my foreground color here. So Alt or Option Delete fills with your foreground color. Control or Command Delete fills with your background color. Looking good. Now here we already mentioned, like, my layer mask isn't perfect, right? Like, this is what my layer mask looks like. It's visible down here. So hold Alt or Option, click on your layer mask, which is going to give you this view of your layer mask. Now I'm just going to paint with my brush tool. I'm going to paint black on my layer mask because I don't want the sky. Remember, this is basically the layer mask for your sky. I don't want it to be visible down here. Why would I? So we're just going to make sure we paint it away from these areas, and that way the sky is not going to be visible down there. And now when I make this visible and invisible, it's just visible where the sky is. It's not messing with my car here and things like that. Okay, now my selection is pretty good, but it could be a little bit better, right? So what I'm going to do is just going to go back to this layer. We're going to select and down to color range. And this time I'm going to click on this like dark color here because, you know, I want that to be selected. There we go. So something like that, and I'm going to hit OK. So that's selected out now, and I'm going to just work on this layer mask again a little bit more. So a layer mask, like you can edit it in a million different ways over and over and over again. So earlier we selected out the sky. Now I'm selecting out, you know, basically what is this, the dark areas here, and we're going to paint it back visible because I thought we could use a little more detail there. That's the real key with layer masks. It's like, don't try to get them perfect with one tool or like one swipe. Just, you know, you can edit them over and over again. And remember, you can always go back and change them. So yeah, layer masks are great. So I've got this area selected. It's the darker area. I'm going to paint it back visible here on this layer because if you can see, I'll just shift click. Sorry, I'm going to hit Command H, which is going to hide those marching ants. That's what these little guys are called. See the selection. I'm going to Command H, which will hide those. Okay. It makes it a lot easier to actually edit something if you don't have those in the way. So if I shift click on this layer mask, or sorry, just make this invisible, you can see I had all this nice detail here earlier. Now I don't have it. So I want to paint my layer mask. I want to paint white on my layer mask. Sorry, I want to paint black on my layer mask, making it invisible where on my sky layer, basically trying to bring this detail back. Okay, so I'll paint it over there, paint it over there, and paint it back up there. Okay, hopefully that wasn't too incredibly confusing. Basically what I did is I selected this color. We'll just do it again. So this, my layer mask looks like this now. Let's just go back in time and see, this is what my layer mask looked like earlier, and it looks like this now. I'm just hitting Command Z to get back and forth. So I selected this black, and then I painted it black on this layer mask to make my layer mask a little bit more refined. Let's just try it again. I'll make this layer invisible so I can see the transition there. We'll go to select, down to color range again, and this time, you know, let's select something a little bit lighter. Bring our fuzziness back up there just a little bit more. There we go. So it's selecting more of those dark colors. Okay, and then here on our layer mask, again, we're going to hit Command H to hide those selections, and I'm going to paint black on my layer mask. And there we go. We've got even more of that detail that's coming through. More of the fuzziness for the sky and, you know, everything like that. There we are. Cool. And it's, you know, that type of thing that's going to make it a little bit more believable. So we've got, you know, all these little details and things like that are still visible. There we go. Even though we've got a sky right behind it, like you can see through the O, we've got a new sky, but we can see all those really nice details visible there. Cool. So that's just a good way to do it. Let's hit Command D to deselect. Now I can still move my sky around and check this out, like through, you know, through the O. Whoops. Apparently I painted that on there, and I'm not quite sure how I did that. Oh, I think I was just painting on my layer mask, not my layer. I apologize. Make sure you don't do that. Okay, this is what I want to be visible. Let's make sure we do that last step again. So this is my layer moving around in my layer mask. Earlier I was painting on my layer instead of my layer mask. It showed up the same. It's just not quite as good of practice. I clicked on that instead of that. Okay, so I'll redo it. Basically what we want to do is select this layer, and again we're just going to select down to color range. Sorry, we need to make this invisible first so we can see that nice detail. All right, let's quit. I have something that shows my new backdrops. All right, clear your head because the last 2 minutes were a little bit confusing. Basically, I want to refine this layer mask a little bit more, okay? So we were to make this invisible, go to select, down here to color range. Select this color range that we want. Let's just bring our fuzziness down just a little bit. There we go. Hit OK. Now these dark areas are selected. I'm going to hit Command H to hide those. Then we're going to click on this layer and the layer mask, and on the layer mask we're going to paint black on the layer mask itself. And that's going to allow those areas to come back visible through this layer. Okay, so this is, again, painting on the layer mask. The only thing I did wrong last time was instead of clicking on the layer mask, I was clicked on the layer. So sometimes that's going to happen. There we go. Now we'll deselect by hitting Command D. Okay, and now we can move our layer around, and now we'll be able to see. Okay, so our selection is really nice now. I mean, we can do whatever we want with this. If I, for instance, grabbed a new, a brush tool and decided to paint, like this nice red color, that would still be, in this nice selection. So we can see it is selected out just like that. I can paint a red sky in. Pretty cool. So we've got our sky with our clouds and everything like that. And I can kind of like, push them and pull them, put them wherever I want. But I think that looks pretty good. There we go. So it's just going to make a little bit more of an interesting image in general. So there's, without, the sky and the clouds, we took this street lamp out and we took that as well. And there we added some clouds in. But we can see, the detail even through all this brush and things like that. Now, if you're not confident 100% with all your selections here, because our clouds and sky, things like that, are pretty close, to what we had originally, if you want to, we have our entire clouds group here, and then this is just our sky group here. If we wanted to click on this layer mask and use our brush tool and just paint away black, you could do this as well. The reason is because our sky is really close to the original sky. It just has these clouds. So this is basically showing, what it would look like without the sky. And in some areas like that, little detail and things like that, I don't have to worry about making great selections. I can just paint back the original sky right over here. And that's done with the layer mask as well. So I hope that's not incredibly confusing, but basically in this area, I just painted back the original sky. You can see it doesn't look exactly the same, but it does wind up blending in pretty well. And that's going to help with some of the trickier selection areas if you need them to help out. All right, very cool. So let's go ahead and close out our clouds group. Sorry, that clouds explanation was a little bit tricky there, and I did something wrong, which I totally apologize, but that happens all the time. I'm not Mr. Perfect Photoshopper. So there's our clouds group. That's looking pretty good. So already we're doing really well. I mean, this is our original image, and that's where we're at right now. We added an exposure, got rid of some distractions, and we put in an entirely new sky, taken on a completely different day, and it looks real. It looks like it should belong in there, and we even have all this nice detail and things like that. Okay, very cool. Well, that's the end of part 1, guys. Thanks so much for watching this, and again, these are videos, so if there was anything particularly confusing, like that last couple seconds with the sky, I apologize about that. Feel free to rewind and watch them again. In part 2, we're going to be picking up. We're going to be taking care of a lot of these little details, and we're going to be doing some work with our color as well as our exposure. Thanks so much, guys, and we'll see you in part 2.